A mafia boss arrives to execute a young mechanic. But when he sees his sister standing fearlessly in front of the gun, everything changes. She doesn't beg, she doesn't cry. She just looks straight into the eyes of the man who could kill her right then and there, and says, "Kill me first." That's the moment Nico Valenti realizes he can't pull the trigger, but that decision to forgive will drag all three into a more brutal fight than anything they've ever faced. If you want to know what happens next, hit like, comment the name of the city you're watching so I know how far my story has progressed, and don't miss a second. The Crown Hill neighborhood didn't have much going for it even on a good day. 3 blocks of cracked asphalt and sagging chain-link fences, a laundromat that had been closed for 2 years with a hand-lettered sign still taped inside the window that said "back in an hour," a corner bodega run by an old Haitian man who didn't ask questions and got by selling lottery tickets and warm beer. The streetlights worked maybe half the time. Trash collected in the gutters where the drains had rusted shut. The houses were small and tired, the kind of places where the walls held dampness in the winter and gave it back as mold in the spring, and the people inside them had learned to stop noticing. It was the kind of neighborhood that the rest of the city had quietly decided didn't need saving. On a Thursday evening in late October, just after dark, 3 black SUVs turned off the main road and rolled down the block without their headlights on. Everyone noticed. Even the old man at the bodega, who was sweeping his front steps, stopped and watched them pass without saying a word. A woman walking a dog crossed to the other side of the street. 2 teenagers sitting on a stoop took one look and went inside without being told. Crown Hill knew what black SUVs without headlights meant. Crown Hill had been knowing for a long time. The vehicles parked in a neat line in front of a narrow auto repair shop. Mercer's Garage, said the sign above the bay doors, the letters painted in faded red by someone who'd cared once. The shop was still lit inside. The bay door was half raised, and the glow of a work lamp leaked out onto the sidewalk in a pale yellow stripe. From the lead SUV, a man stepped out. Nico Valenti was 41 years old and built like someone had assembled him for a specific and unpleasant purpose. Wide through the shoulders, long in the arms, with hands that looked too large for normal use. He had a face that didn't give much away, dark eyes set deep, a jaw that had been broken once and healed slightly wrong, and a stillness about him that wasn't calm so much as controlled. The kind of stillness that came from years of deciding who lived and who didn't, and making peace with the math of it. He wore a dark jacket, no tie. He didn't dress for occasions. He dressed for work. 6 men came out of the other 2 vehicles and formed a loose perimeter on the sidewalk without being told. They knew how this went. They'd done it before. Nico stood outside the half-raised bay door for a moment, listening. He could hear a radio playing something with horns and a walking bass line, and beneath that the sound of a wrench on a metal. Someone was still working. He ducked under the door. The garage was small and dense with the smell of motor oil and rust and something chemical that clung to the back of the throat. There was a late-model Civic up on the lift with its exhaust system half removed, and a workbench along the far wall covered in parts laid out in a specific order that suggested the person who'd arranged them knew what they were doing. A tool chest, a rolling stool, a mini fridge with a sticker on it that said, "Cold beer, warm hands," which was meant to be funny. Under the car, a pair of legs in dirty coveralls. "Ethan Mercer," Nico said. The legs stopped moving. A beat of silence. Then the rolling board slid out from under the Civic, and a young man looked up at Nico from flat on his back on the concrete floor. He was maybe 23, thin but wiry, with grease on his forearms and a smear of it across one cheek and dark circles under his eyes that spoke to too many late nights and not enough sleep. He had his brother's jaw. People said that when they meant the jaw of someone born into something hard, and eyes that were smart in a way that probably hadn't done him many favors. Those eyes went wide when he saw who was standing over him. "Get up," Nico said. Ethan got up. He did it slowly, the way a person does when their legs are considering not cooperating. He stood with the rolling board at his feet, and the work lamp behind him throwing his shadow long and thin across the oil-stained floor, and he looked at Nico Valenti the way people look at something they always knew was coming, but hoped wouldn't. "I don't," he started. " 'Don't,' Nico said. Ethan's mouth closed. 'Don't,' Nico said. 'Ethan's 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 mouth You were at the Whitmore Street warehouse on the night of September 14th, Nico said. It wasn't a question. You were there because Delgado owed you money for transmission work, and he told you to come after hours. You went in through the side door. You saw 3 of my people and what they were doing. You walked back out, and you've been telling yourself for 6 weeks that you didn't see anything. Ethan's breathing had changed. It was getting shallow and faster, the way breathing does when the body starts preparing for something it doesn't want to name. Mr. Valenti, you're not a bad kid, Nico said, and there was something almost tired in his voice, like a man reading from a document he'd read too many times before. That's not the point. The point is what you saw. You understand what happens now. He reached under his jacket. The back door of the garage burst open. What came through it wasn't large, and it wasn't slow, and it wasn't afraid. She was maybe 5'4", late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a knot that had been neat 6 hours ago and wasn't anymore. She was still wearing her work clothes, a button-down with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, dark slacks. And she had the look of someone who'd been in the middle of something and had dropped it without hesitation because she'd gotten a call or a feeling or both, and she'd come running. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold. Her eyes were something else entirely. She crossed the garage in 4 steps and put herself between Nico and her brother. Not beside him, between him and the man with the gun. Don't, Nico said again, but to a different person now. Move, said one of the men who'd come through the bay door behind Nico. 2 of them had followed him inside without Ethan noticing. No, said Claire Mercer. The word landed in the garage like something dropped from a height, clean and flat and final. Nico looked at her. She was looking back at him with an expression he hadn't expected and couldn't quite categorize. Not hysterics, not pleading, not the frozen animal panic that usually lived in the eyes of people in these situations. What was in her eyes was something harder and worse than fear. It was the look of someone who had already done the math and made the decision and was past the point of renegotiating. You want to kill him, she said. Her voice was steady. Not brave steady, not performance steady, just steady. You're going to have to go through me to do it, and I'm not moving. Ethan grabbed her arm. Claire, what are you— Shut up, Ethan. You need to— I said shut up. Nico hadn't moved. The gun was half drawn, his hand on it, and he was looking at this woman who was standing between him and a job he'd come here to do, and something was happening in the back of his skull that he didn't have a word for. She wasn't trembling. He'd watched people try to hold it together in moments like this. Had watched men twice her size dissolve when the reality of it hit them. She wasn't dissolving. She was standing there with her feet planted and her eyes on him, and her body physically blocking the man behind her, as if her 130 pounds of bone and stubbornness constituted an actual barrier. And the terrible thing, the thing that Nico couldn't process properly, was that it did. Who are you? He said. His sister. She said it like it was the only relevant fact. I know who you are to him. That's not what I asked. She held his gaze. The person standing between you and him. That's who I am right now. You want to do this, do it to me first. One of Nico's men shifted behind him. He held up one finger without looking back and the movement stopped. Claire. Ethan's voice had cracked. He was trying to pull her back and she wasn't letting him. Claire, please, don't do this. You don't know what— I know exactly what, she said. I knew the second they called me from the corner. I knew when I was running here. I'm not stupid and I'm not confused. Her eyes hadn't moved off Nico. I'm asking you to hear me. You're not asking, Nico said. No, she agreed. I'm not. He looked at her for a long moment. The radio was still going somewhere behind all of this. A trumpet, muted, walking through something slow and blue, utterly indifferent to what was happening in the garage. The work lamp hummed. The smell of motor oil sat thick in the air. Nico had been in this business for 23 years. He had seen courage, real courage, and he had seen people perform it, and he had learned to tell the difference with the precision of a man whose life had occasionally depended on reading that distinction correctly. He knew what performance looked like. He knew the tells. The jaw that was too tight, the breath held too long, the eyes that moved just slightly toward the door. She wasn't performing, which meant he was standing in a garage in Crown Hill at 9 o'clock on a Thursday night, and the thing currently stopping him wasn't a weapon or a rival or a calculation of risk. It was a woman in work clothes who'd run here to put herself in a bullet's path for her brother and was not going to move. Something happened in Nico's chest, a tightening, old and specific, and not welcome. He had not felt it in a very long time. He became aware suddenly of her hands, and the fact that they were not shaking. He became aware of the way she was standing, weight distributed, chin level, the posture of someone braced not against him but for him, as if she'd already absorbed the impact and was simply waiting for the rest. He became aware that she was looking at him like she was trying to see something in him, and the thought arrived with the force of something he didn't want, that she was looking for the thing he'd buried a long time ago and covered over with cement and years of necessary decisions. He pulled his hand away from the gun. His men didn't react, because they'd learned not to react to things they didn't understand. "You got 2 minutes," Nico said. "Talk." Claire took one breath. Just one. Like she was resetting. "My brother fixes cars," she said. "That's all he does. He works 12 hours a day in a shop that he's been trying to keep open since our dad died. And he's behind on rent, and he's behind on his equipment lease, and he does not belong in whatever this is." She stopped. Then, "What he saw, he can't unknow it. I understand that. But I'm telling you that Ethan Mercer has never spoken your name to anyone. Not to police, not to anyone, because he's not stupid, and he was scared and he was trying to survive. Killing him doesn't protect you from anything. It just kills him." Nico said nothing. "Whatever you're afraid of," she said, "it's not him." The silence that followed had a weight to it. "How do you know what I'm afraid of?" Nico said. Quiet. "Because if you were afraid of him, you'd have done it already. You wouldn't be standing here listening to me." Something shifted in her face, and not softer, not harder, just more direct, like she'd decided to stop the approach and go straight at the thing. "You're not a man who listens to people in this situation, but you're listening. So either I'm wrong about you, or I'm not." Another silence. Ethan was not breathing. He might have forgotten how. Nico looked at Claire Mercer, at the dark circles under her eyes that matched her brother's, at the calluses on her right hand from however many years of whatever work she did, at the way she was holding herself like someone who had been the strong one her whole life and had learned to hate needing it but hadn't stopped. And something cracked open in him. Not wide, not catastrophically, just a fissure, a hairline fracture in a wall he'd built over a decade and a half, because she reminded him, in her posture and her refusal and the terrible clear weight of her eyes, of a promise he had made a long time ago to someone who was gone, a promise he had broken not with a single act but with years of accumulated choices, each one reasonable, each one necessary, each one taking him further from the person he'd made that promise to be. He hadn't thought about that in years. He thought about it now. "Lower your weapons," he said. His men obeyed without question. Claire didn't flinch, didn't exhale visibly, didn't do anything that would read as relief. She was still watching him with those direct, dark eyes, waiting to see what it meant. "Your brother walks," Nico said. "He's not touched. His shop's not touched. His name goes off the list." He paused. "But there are conditions." "Tell me." "He leaves the city, not permanently. 30 days, somewhere quiet, somewhere none of this follows him. He doesn't talk to police, doesn't talk to lawyers, doesn't file any kind of statement or report. He goes dark and stays dark until I've dealt with the source of the problem he stumbled into." Nico's voice was flat and certain and completely devoid of the word please. "When those 30 days are up, he comes back and he fixes cars and he never crosses paths with my people again." Ethan started to say something. "I'm talking to her," Nico said without looking at him. Claire was quiet for a moment. Then, "What's the catch?" "You come with me." The garage went completely silent. Even the radio seemed to drop a register. "What?" Ethan said. "Not as a prisoner," Nico said, still holding Claire's gaze. "Not as leverage. I have enough of both of those, and they don't do me anything useful right now." He stopped, let the words sit. "As a consultant. Someone who can look at my operation without the investment of everyone inside it. Someone who isn't afraid of me." A beat. "Apparently." "You don't know anything about me," Claire said. "I know you ran across this neighborhood in the dark to stand in front of a loaded gun for your brother," Nico said. "I know you didn't shake. I know you looked at me and read something in me that most people with twice your experience and twice your leverage don't have the nerve to try. He tilted his head just slightly. I know enough. Claire was quiet for a long time. Ethan grabbed her arm again. You're not seriously considering Ethan. Her voice was soft but absolute. Claire, you can't go with him. You don't know what that... I know exactly what it is. She turned and looked at her brother fully for the first time since she'd walked in. And there was something in her face that was older than her age, something that had been forged over years of being the person who made the hard call because someone had to, and she was the one who always showed up. Get in touch with Aunt Rosie in Providence. Tell her you need the spare room. Don't use your regular phone. She glanced at the shop around them, the tools on the bench, the car still on the lift. Leave the Civic. I'll deal with the invoice when I'm back. When you're... His voice broke. Claire, hey. She put her hand on his face, just for a second. I'm not dying tonight, and neither are you. She dropped her hand and turned back to Nico. What are the terms? Nico looked at her steadily. You stay at my estate. You're free to move within the property. You're not a prisoner, but you don't leave without my knowledge. You're treated with respect by everyone on my staff, or I hear about it. He paused. In exchange, your brother is safe, and I'll have 3 of my men watching him until the 30 days are done. If anything happens to him, then we renegotiate, Nico said, but nothing's going to happen to him. He's not the problem. Claire studied Nico's face for what felt like a long time. She was looking for the lie in it, the angle, the mechanism of a trap she hadn't identified yet. She didn't find one, which didn't mean it wasn't there, but it meant she couldn't locate it, and she was good at locating things. All right, she said. Claire, Ethan's voice had gone desperate. I'll call you when I can. She looked at him one more time, the look of a woman who has done the accounting and come out the other side of it, tired and certain. Lock up when you leave. Take the cash from the drawer in the office. There's about 400 in there. Don't argue with me. She walked to the bay door, stopped, turned back to Nico. I'm going to need 5 minutes to get some things from the apartment across the street. 4, Nico said. She looked at him. Something that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite contempt moved across her mouth. 4, she agreed, and walked out into the October night. Nico stood in the garage for a moment. Around him, his men held their positions, silent and professionally incurious. Ethan Mercer was staring at him with a combination of disbelief and horror, and something raw beneath both of those things. If you hurt her, he started. I won't, Nico said. He wasn't looking at Ethan. He was looking at the bay door where Claire had disappeared into the dark. He was thinking about the moment she'd stepped in front of the gun. The absolute zero hesitation of it. The way her feet had come down solid, weight forward, as if she'd been walking toward that spot her whole life without knowing it. He was thinking about a girl he'd known 17 years ago who'd had the same walk, the same forward weight, the same refusal to be turned back from a thing she'd decided on. A girl whose name he hadn't said out loud in a decade. He was thinking about a promise he'd made at a graveside, in the rain, with his hands numb and his chest so tight he thought it might split. A promise to be different than what he'd become, to be worth something beyond the fear he generated, to build something that justified the damage. A promise he had broken. He hadn't thought about it in years, because thinking about it served no practical purpose. And Nico Valenti had long ago trained himself to abandon things that served no practical purpose. But he was thinking about it now, standing in a garage that smelled like oil and rust, watching the empty bay door, waiting for a woman he didn't know to come back. She came back in 3 minutes and 50 seconds. One bag, medium-sized, packed with the efficiency of someone who'd had to pack and leave before. She climbed into the back of the lead SUV without being told which one. She sat with her bag on her lap and her hands folded on top of it, and looked out the window at her brother's garage as they pulled away, and her face in the glass of the window was something Nico, sitting across from her, couldn't read for the first time since he'd walked into the garage. He watched her. She didn't look at him. The SUVs rolled back down Crown Hill's cracked asphalt and turned onto the main road, and the neighborhood receded behind them. The dark streetlights, the bodega, the old man gone now inside with his broom, the houses with their damp walls and their tired faces. And ahead of them was Nico Valenti's estate. 18 acres behind a wall with cameras on every post, and the empire inside it that was, though Nico did not yet know the full extent of it, already quietly on fire. In the second SUV, two of his captains were texting each other. The messages were brief and coded, but their meaning was clear enough. She's coming with him. He's distracted. The window is opening. They had been waiting for a window for months. They were going to use it. And everything that had just happened in that garage, the gun, the girl, the broken open moment in Nico Valenti's chest, had just become the first move in a game that he didn't know he was already inside. The estate appeared out of the dark, like something that had always been there and always would be. A thing that didn't announce itself so much as simply exist, massive and inevitable behind its walls. The gates were black iron, 12 feet tall, set into stone columns with cameras on top that tracked the movement of the vehicles without ceremony. They opened before the lead SUV reached them, which meant someone had been watching from the moment they turned off the main road. Claire watched the gates through the window and didn't say anything. The driveway was long, a quarter mile at least, lined with trees that had been planted far enough apart to allow clear sightlines in both directions. She noted that. She noted the two men at the gatehouse, the cameras at the tree line, the way the gravel had been raked recently. She noted the lighting along the drive, which was low and deliberate, the kind of lighting designed to illuminate without announcing. She had spent 8 years working risk assessment for a mid-sized logistics company before the company folded and she'd come back to Crown Hill to help Ethan with the shop. She knew how to look at a space and read its priorities. This space's priorities were control and information. The main house came into view as they rounded the last curve. 3 stories, stone facade, wings on both sides. The kind of place that didn't have a style so much as a statement. Lights in the upper windows. A man on the front steps who watched the vehicles arrive with the posture of someone waiting to be told what to do next. The SUV stopped. Nico got out first. He said something to the man on the steps that Claire couldn't hear, and then he turned and waited for her. She got out with her bag. The night air hit her, cold and clean and smelling of dead leaves and something distant, maybe a fire somewhere on the property. She stood in the driveway and looked at the house. It looked back. "You'll have a room on the second floor," Nico said. "Private bathroom. The house staff can get you whatever you need." "I don't need anything," she said. "Food's in the kitchen until 10. After that, there's a standing arrangement with the night staff if you want something later." "I'm fine." He looked at her. Then, "You haven't eaten since this afternoon. There's a tension in your jaw you've been holding since the garage." She looked at him sideways. "You noticed that." "I notice things," he said, and walked up the steps. She followed him inside. The interior was not what she expected, which was maybe the point. It was spare in a way that felt intentional rather than neglected. Good furniture, not ostentatious, dark wood and clean lines, and almost nothing on the walls except for 2 paintings in the main hall that she recognized as originals, though she couldn't have said the artists' names. No trophies, no visible weaponry, no overt signals of what Nico Valenti was. It looked like the home of a man who had money and used it carefully and didn't feel the need to explain himself through his decor. She was shown to a room by a woman named Dessa, late 50s, gray-haired, who handed her towels and showed her the thermostat and said dinner was pasta if she wanted, and left without drama. Claire sat on the edge of the bed with her bag still zipped and listened to the house settle around her. Old houses always talked. She was learning the vocabulary of this one. What she heard, after an hour of sitting still in the dark, footsteps in the corridor outside, twice in 20 minutes, a door somewhere below closing with the controlled care of someone who didn't want to be heard. Male voices, 2 of them, low and fast, somewhere beneath her, through the floor, through whatever room was directly below. Not arguing, planning. She lay down without changing her clothes and stared at the ceiling and thought about Ethan on a bus to Providence and tried to believe that was actually happening. She didn't sleep. By morning, she had mapped the parts of the house she could access and had started on the parts she couldn't. Nico found her in the library at 7 in the morning. She was standing at the window with a cup of coffee she'd made herself in the kitchen without asking, looking out at the grounds. Gray morning, mist in the tree line, 2 men walking the perimeter at a distance that kept them always visible from the main house. "You didn't sleep," he said. "I slept enough." "That's not the same thing." "No," she agreed. "It's not." He poured himself coffee from the pot she'd left on the sideboard, black, no pause to consider options, and stood across the room from her. He was in a white shirt, no jacket, which was the most unguarded she'd seen him look, and it changed almost nothing about the quality of his presence. "I want to know what actually happened at Whitmore Street," she said. He looked at her over the rim of the cup. "Not what Ethan saw," she said. "What was happening there, and why it's enough to get a civilian mechanic killed for accidentally walking in on it. That's not your business yet. You told me you wanted a consultant. You can't consult someone on a problem you won't describe." A pause. He set the cup down, looked at her with that flat, steady appraisal she was getting used to, the look of a man who spent most of his time deciding whether things were worth his time. "There was a transfer," he said finally. "Evidence. Physical records that connect 3 of my captains to a series of killings that were done without my authorization over the past 8 months. He stopped. "Let that land. Those 3 captains are also the men who sent me after your brother." Claire was quiet. "They told me Ethan Mercer was a CI," Nico said. "Told me he'd been seen meeting with federal contacts, that he'd identified 2 of our couriers and was building a case." His jaw shifted slightly, the first purely involuntary movement she'd seen from him. "They had documentation, photographs, phone records." "Fabricated," she said. "All of it." "How do you know?" "Because after I saw you stand in front of that gun, I made 3 phone calls from the car on the way back." Something moved through his voice. Not emotion exactly, more like the echo of one. "Ethan Mercer has no contact history with federal law enforcement. His phone records are clean. The photographs were composited. Good work, but not perfect." He picked up the coffee again. "I know what a fabricated file looks like. I've seen enough real ones." Claire absorbed this. "So 3 of your own captains built a false case against a mechanic who saw something he shouldn't have, specifically to send you to kill him." "Yes." "Why?" "Because if I'd killed Ethan Mercer, I'd have done it believing he was connected to federal investigation. And the next step, the step they'd already prepared, was evidence suggesting his federal contact was working in coordination with my main rival syndicate." He said it evenly, like a man describing weather. "Which would have started a war. And a war benefits them how? In a war, certain positions consolidate. Certain men become indispensable." His eyes were flat and certain. 3 captains who've been quietly moving money out of the organization for 2 years would become, overnight, the most powerful people in my operation. Claire looked out the window at the 2 men still walking the perimeter in the mist. "How long have you known about the money?" "I've suspected for 6 months. I didn't have the chain of it yet." He paused. "Your brother's situation gave me the pull thread." "My brother almost got killed, and it's a pull thread." "I'm not asking you to be comfortable with that." "Good," she said. "Because I'm not." She turned from the window. "Who are the 3 captains?" "That's not something I'm sharing yet." "Why not?" "Because you've been in this house for 8 hours, and I don't know you. You trusted me enough to bring me here." "I trusted your instincts," he said, "and your nerve. That's different from trusting your discretion. I don't know yet where the line is between you protecting your brother and you doing something with information that makes this more complicated." She looked at him for a long moment. "Fair," she said finally, which was not what he expected her to say. He had expected an argument. She had given him an assessment. He picked up his coffee and left the library, and she stood there in the gray morning light and felt the shape of the situation she was inside. The dimensions of it, the weight, and started to think about how to map it. She didn't have to wait long for it to start coming to her. His name was Caruso, and he found her that afternoon. She was in the East Corridor, having asked Dessa about the laundry room and taken a long route back, when he came around a corner and stopped and looked at her with the specific quality of attention that she identified immediately as threat assessment, masquerading as curiosity. He was around 50, thick through the neck, with a face that had been handsome a long time ago and had settled into something meaner. He was dressed well. He smiled at her. "You must be the sister," he said. "I must be," she said. "Caruso." He offered a hand. She shook it, noted the grip. Firm, slightly too long. "I run the northern operation, one of Mr. Valenti's longest-serving men. He said it with the pride of someone who believed the credential meant something. I heard what happened last night. Brave thing, what you did. Anyone would have done it. No, he said, with a smile that sat slightly wrong on his face. They wouldn't. Most people, when they see a situation like that, they step back. Self-preservation. You didn't do that. He tilted his head. Makes me wonder what your angle is. My angle is my brother's alive. And now you're here. He let the observation sit. In the house. With access. Limited access, she said. I can't leave without notification. I'm not exactly a house guest. No, Caruso said. You're not. His eyes had something in them. A calculation moving just below the surface, like something swimming under ice. Mister, Valenti doesn't usually bring people into this environment without a reason. Makes me curious what yours is. Ask him, she said pleasantly, and walked past him. She felt his eyes on her back until she turned the corner. She found Dessa in the kitchen 10 minutes later and asked, while helping her fold linens, how long Caruso had been with the organization. 20 years, give or take, Dessa said, without looking up from the sheet she was straightening. Him and Mr. Bassi and Mr. Farrow, the three of them came up together. She stopped, seemed to realize she'd said something. I'm not a gossip. I know, Claire said. I didn't ask you anything. Dessa looked at her, then went back to the linens. Long time, she said. 20 years is a long time. Claire thought about that for the rest of the afternoon. She thought about 3 captains. She thought about Caruso's too long handshake and the swimming under ice quality of his eyes. She thought about the way he'd said access with a particular weight on it, as if he was already considering what she might access and what that might mean for him. She had been in the house for less than 12 hours, and one of the people she should be worried about had already introduced himself. That was either careless or deliberate. She wasn't sure which was worse. At 6 that evening, Nico came to find her. He stood in the doorway of her room. He'd knocked, she gave him that, and looked at her where she was sitting on the floor with her back to the bed, which was where she went when she was thinking. Caruso spoke to you, he said. She looked up. You have cameras in the corridors. I have cameras everywhere. Then you already know what he said. I know what he said. I don't know what you thought of it. He leaned against the doorframe. Tell me. He wanted to know my angle, she said. He used that word, angle. He also used the word access, and he let it sit in the air like a question he wasn't asking. She paused. He's not afraid of you. Nico was very still. Most people in this house are afraid of you in some register, she said. Some of them hide it well, some of them don't bother hiding it at all. Dessa's not afraid of you, but that's different. She's known you too long to be afraid. She's moved past it into something else. Caruso's different. He's not afraid of you because he's already thinking past you. She watched Nico's face. I've been in this house 12 hours, and I can see it, which means either I'm reading it wrong or you've been choosing not to see it. The silence that came after that was long and specific. Go on, he said. He's performing, she said. The handshake, the preamble about being your longest-serving man. He wanted me to know he has standing in this organization, and he wanted me to know he was watching me. That's not someone who feels secure in his position. That's someone who's making sure I understand the power dynamic before I get oriented enough to disrupt it. Nico pushed off the doorframe and walked into the room without being invited. He sat in the chair by the window, elbows on his knees, and looked at her on the floor, and for a moment the architecture of the scene was such that he looked at her like something he was trying to figure out the use of. Bassi and Farrow, he said. The other 2. You'll meet them tomorrow. There's a situation meeting in the afternoon that I've decided you'll sit in on. Why? Because I want to watch them watch you. She looked at him steadily. You're using me as bait. I'm using you as information, he said. There's a difference. Not to me, there isn't. Fair, he said, and she recognized her own word back at her, delivered with the same flat precision she'd used, and something about that, the fact that he'd retained it and returned it, made her suddenly and unwillingly aware of him as something more than a threat to be navigated. She looked at the floor. What was on the Whitmore Street evidence, she said. The physical records. What was in them? He took a breath. Let it out slowly. 8 months ago, 3 civilians were killed in connection with a debt collection operation that I did not authorize. The kills were sloppy. Public, witnesses, press attention. I was told it was done by a subcontractor who'd been terminated as a result. He stopped. The records at Whitmore showed the subcontractor was still on payroll, and the authorization signatures on the collection order were mine. Forged, but mine. Claire looked up at him. If those records surface through federal channels, he said, I go away for the rest of my life for 3 murders I didn't commit. He said it with a control that was itself a kind of violence, the force required to hold that level of injustice flat and still. The men who created those records and are currently holding them over my head are the same men who fabricated the case against your brother. They've been running a double play, she said slowly, stealing from the organization, committing unauthorized violence, and simultaneously building a case they can use against you if you get too close. And positioning for the war, he said, which was supposed to start with your brother. She was quiet for a moment. Where are the records now? Still at Whitmore, under guard by people I believe are loyal. He paused. Believe? But you're not certain. In this business, you are never certain. She got up off the floor, stood by the window, arms crossed, looking out at the grounds in the evening dark. If they know you're pulling on the thread, she said, and they will know, probably soon, if not already, then the next move is to move those records before you can get to them, or to use them preemptively. Yes. And they know you brought me here. Yes. Then they're already asking what I am to you, she said, and what I might know. Yes. She turned and looked at him. That makes me a target. He met her eyes. Yes, he said, for the 4th time without apology and without redirection, and she understood then that he was not a man who softened information, and that this, strangely, was the most trustworthy thing about him. She went back to not sleeping that night. At 2 a.m, she heard the footsteps in the corridor again. Same interval as the night before. 20 minutes between passes. She'd timed it now. Whoever was walking the corridor outside her room was doing it on a schedule, which meant it was either routine security or something pretending to be routine security, and she didn't know yet which. She lay in the dark and thought about the meeting tomorrow, and what 3 men who had built a frame around Nico Valenti and tried to use her brother as the detonator would look like when they sat across from her. She thought about what Nico had said. I want to watch them watch you. She thought about being bait. She'd done it before, in a different context, in a corporate liability situation years ago, walking into a room where she knew the person across from her was lying, holding her expression neutral and her eyes open and waiting for the tell. She knew how to do this. The stakes were simply different. She was still running this through her head when she heard it. Not footsteps. Something else. From below. Muffled by floors and walls and distance, but carrying enough to reach her in the silence of 2 a.m. A voice. Male. Elevated but controlled. Then a second voice, lower and faster, cutting the first one off. Then silence. Then, very distinctly, through the floor, the sound of something being moved. Furniture, or a door, or something heavier. The kind of sound that had weight in it. The kind of sound that happened when people were doing something they didn't want the rest of the house to know about. Claire sat up in bed. She sat still for 30 seconds. Then she got up, walked to the door in her socks, and opened it 1 inch. The corridor was empty in both directions. She slipped out, moved to the staircase, and went down to the first floor as quietly as she could move, which was quiet enough. The first floor was dim. Low lights left on through the night, no staff visible. She stood at the bottom of the stairs and listened. The house had gone back to silence, but it was a different silence than before. Tighter. The way a room goes quiet when people in it stop talking and wait. She moved toward the east wing. The door to the study, Nico's study, she'd clocked it that morning, was open 1 inch, with a line of light coming through it. She stood 6 feet away and listened. 2 voices. One of them she recognized as Caruso. The other she didn't know yet. Lower, older, something textured and patient in it that was its own kind of menace. Moved up, the second voice said. We don't have the window we thought. He's already looking at the Whitmore chain, Caruso said. She's been here one day, and he's already... I know. Then we move tonight. If we wait for the meeting to... We're not moving tonight. We're not doing anything tonight that looks reactive. Reactive is how you get caught. The second voice had the flat certainty of a man who'd been making this kind of calculation for a very long time. We let the meeting happen. We let her sit in the room. We let Nico think he has time. And then, a pause. And then we use the girl, the second voice said. Same as we use the mechanic, different application. Caruso made a sound that might have been a scent or something slightly less than a scent, and Claire stood in the dark hallway 6 feet from an open door and processed what she'd just heard with the part of her brain that had gone very cold and very quiet, the part that didn't panic, the part that assessed. They knew. They knew Nico was pulling the thread. They knew about the Whitmore records and the timeline, and they were now going to use her the same way they'd tried to use Ethan, not as collateral, but as a mechanism, a way to move Nico, a way to force a decision. She thought about Ethan on a bus to Providence. She thought about Nico saying yes 4 times, without apology. She thought about the promise she'd made herself in that garage when she'd stepped in front of the gun, that she would not die there, and neither would her brother, and whatever it took to make those 2 things true, she was going to do. She turned and went back upstairs. She stood outside Nico's bedroom door and knocked twice. 5 seconds of silence. Then the door opened. He was awake. He was fully awake, which meant he hadn't been sleeping either, and he looked at her in the doorway with those deep-set eyes that didn't waste time on surprise. And she looked back at him and said, "Caruso's in your study right now with someone I don't know. They moved up whatever they're planning, and they're coming for me next." Nico's jaw set. He reached back inside the room, took something from the nightstand, and stepped out into the corridor. "Who's the second voice?" she said. Older, patient, deliberate. Nico was already moving toward the stairs. "Faro," he said. "Not Bassi." "Bassi doesn't make plans," he said. "He executes them." He stopped at the top of the stairs and looked at her with something in his face that had shifted. Not softened, the wrong word entirely, but something had moved in it, a degree of alignment, as if they were now facing the same direction and he was acknowledging that. "You went downstairs alone." "I heard something." "You should have come to me first." "I didn't know what I was going to find. I know how to listen." He looked at her for a moment. Then he went down the stairs and she followed him, and somewhere below them in the study with the light still on and the door still open an inch, 2 men who had already tried to kill her brother were making new plans with her name in them. And the night that had already been long was about to get considerably longer. What none of them knew yet, not Caruso, not Faro, not even Nico, was that 3 hours earlier, a man named Bassi had made a phone call to a number that wasn't in any of the organization's records, and the person who'd answered it wasn't a rival syndicate or a lawyer or an off-book contractor. It was a federal agent. And the conversation they'd had would, by morning, change every calculation everyone in that house was making. The study door was still open its 1 inch when Nico reached the bottom of the stairs. He didn't push it. He stopped 2 feet from it and stood completely still and listened, and Claire stood behind him and did the same. And for a moment the 2 of them existed in the narrow corridor like 2 people who had arrived at the same conclusion by different roads and were now standing at its edge together. Inside the study, the voices had dropped. Caruso and Faro had gone to something barely above a murmur, which meant they'd heard something or felt something or had the instincts of men who'd survived long enough to develop a second nervous system for exactly this kind of moment. Nico pushed the door open with one hand and walked in. Caruso was at the far end of the room, standing near the bookshelves with a glass of something amber in his right hand, and his left hand came up fast as the door swung, not reaching for a weapon, which told Claire he'd left his weapon somewhere else, which itself was information. Faro was in the chair by the desk, and he was the one she hadn't met yet, and looking at him now she understood the voice. Late 60s, lean in the way of someone who had been burning themselves as fuel for a long time, with white hair cropped close and eyes that were the color of nothing in particular and gave away even less. Faro didn't stand, didn't reach for anything. He just looked at Nico and then at Claire, and the expression on his face was something she could only describe as the expression of a man who had already run the next 20 moves and was satisfied with where they landed. That expression scared her more than anything she'd seen in 2 days. Late for a meeting, Nico said. Couldn't sleep, Caruso said. The smile arrived on schedule, slightly too fast. Old problem. Both of you, same night, my study. Your study's where the decent scotch is. Caruso tilted the glass in a gesture of relaxed explanation that didn't reach his eyes. Nico looked at Pharaoh. Pharaoh looked back at him. They held that look for 3 or 4 seconds, and what passed between them in those seconds was not the look of a superior and a subordinate. It was the look of 2 men who had known each other for 20 years and had arrived, finally, at the end of the performance. You found it, Pharaoh said, not a question. Found what? Nico said. Don't. Pharaoh's voice was patient and tired and completely without fear. You came down here because she heard us, which means we know that you've been pulling the chain since last night. He glanced at Claire with something in his eyes that she recognized as assessment, clean and professional and utterly impersonal. She's faster than we expected. I want to know where the records are, Nico said. Which records? Don't, Nico said, the word flat as a blade. Pharaoh set his hands on his knees. The records aren't at Whitmore anymore. They haven't been at Whitmore for 72 hours. Nico's face didn't change, but something in the room changed. A pressure drop, the way the air changes before something structural fails. Where? Nico said. Somewhere you won't get to them tonight. Pharaoh's voice remained patient. Or tomorrow. You moved them because you knew I was looking. We moved them because we've been 3 steps ahead of this conversation for 6 months, Pharaoh said. We've been waiting for you to pull the thread. Frankly, we expected it sooner. Claire was watching Caruso. He was watching her back with that swimming under ice quality she'd clocked in the corridor, but there was something different in it now. A readiness, a coiled quality, like a man waiting for a specific word. The federal contact, Nico said. Bassi made a call tonight. Pharaoh's expression shifted, just slightly. A fractional movement at the corner of his mouth that was either surprise or its very precise imitation. You have Bassi's phone. I have eyes on Bassi's phone, Nico said. I've had eyes on all 3 of your phones for 4 months. I didn't have the chain yet. Now I do. Pharaoh was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded slowly, the nod of a man recalculating. Then you know about the arrangement. Tell me about the arrangement, Nico said, in your words. Pharaoh looked at him steadily. Bassi has been in contact with a federal organized crime unit for 14 months. He's been providing information in exchange for guaranteed immunity and relocation. Low-level information initially, enough to keep them interested without exposing anything material. He paused. The material was being held in reserve. For when? For when they needed to move, Claire said. Both men looked at her. The material was the insurance, she said. As long as they held it, the federal contact stayed viable. The moment they needed to exit, the moment something went wrong inside the organization and they needed a way out, they'd hand over the record showing Nico authorized 3 murders, he goes away, and they walk out under federal protection. She looked at Pharaoh. That's what Bassi was doing tonight. He was making the call because something went wrong. Something went wrong faster than they planned. Pharaoh was looking at her with an expression that had moved past assessment into something closer to respect, which was the most unsettling thing she'd seen yet. She's very fast, he said to Nico. She's right, Nico said. Substantially, Pharaoh agreed. What did I miss? She said. Pharaoh turned back to her. The immunity arrangement doesn't cover 3 people. It covers 1. Bassi. He let that sit. Caruso and I were not informed of the federal contact until 4 months ago, by which time Bassi had been building his exit for a year. The room went quiet. Claire looked at Caruso. The glass in his hand was very still. The smile was gone. He's playing all 3 of you, she said slowly. He's playing everyone, Pharaoh said without inflection. The records he's holding, they don't just have Nico's forged signature. They have ours, mine and Caruso's. We are implicated in those 3 murders whether we authorized them or not, because Bassi needed witnesses on paper in case we became inconvenient. He looked at Nico. If those records go federal, I go away for the rest of my life. Caruso goes away. You go away. And Bassi walks out clean with a new name and federal protection and whatever he's siphoned from the operating accounts in the past 18 months. The silence that followed this was the densest thing in the room. Nico stood absolutely still in the middle of the study with his hands at his sides and his face doing nothing that Claire could read, which she was beginning to understand meant something was happening behind it at a velocity and temperature that he was choosing not to express. "Where's Bassi now?" Nico said. "In his suite," Caruso said. First words he'd spoken since the beginning, and his voice had changed. The performance was gone from it, and what was underneath was harder and more honest. "He doesn't know you came downstairs. He doesn't know she heard us." "He made the call an hour ago," Nico said, "which means he's already set something in motion." "Or he's waiting for a response," Claire said. "If the federal unit was asleep when he called, if he left a message through a handler—" She stopped. "How does the contact arrangement work? Does Bassi call a direct line or go through an intermediary?" Farrow looked at her. "Intermediary. A lawyer who functions as a cutout. The lawyer contacts the unit. Then there's lag time," she said. "The lawyer doesn't call at 2 in the morning. He calls at business hours, which means Bassi doesn't have a response yet, which means he doesn't know if the handoff is confirmed, which means there's still a window." "A window for what?" Caruso said. "For getting to the records before he can deliver them," she said. Nico turned and looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen from him before. Not warm, not grateful, something more specific than either, the look of a man encountering a mind working the same problem at the same speed in the same direction. "Where are the records?" he said to Farrow. "If I tell you," Farrow said, "I need something." "You're not in a negotiating position." "I'm in the only negotiating position that matters," Farrow said, and his voice was still that flat, patient thing, still carrying no fear. "I know where the records are. You don't." The window she's describing closes at 9 in the morning when Bassi's lawyer opens his office. "It's 2:45 now. You have 6 hours. He looked at Nico with the directness of a man laying tiles. "I want my name off the organization's debt collection records going back 3 years, and I want 30 days in a car and whatever cash you can get me by morning, and I want your word that Caruso isn't touched." "You're negotiating for him." He didn't know about Bassi's federal arrangement either. Something moved through Farrow's voice. Not sentiment exactly, but the residue of 20 years that hadn't been entirely without its own weight. "He found out the same time I did. He's been trying to figure a way out of it since." Nico looked at Caruso. Caruso met his eyes. The performance was so completely gone now that what was left was the face of a man in his 50s who was very tired and had been making bad choices for long enough that the bad choices had started to look like the only choices. "I'm done," he said simply. "Whatever you want from me. I'm done." Something moved through Nico, not forgiveness, not trust, something practical and final. He looked at Farrow. "Tell me where the records are." Farrow told him. Claire processed the location and cross-referenced it against everything she'd absorbed in 2 days in this house. A secondary property, a warehouse-style space in the industrial district that functioned as a document storage facility for the organization's legitimate business front. Accessible, guarded, but by men whose loyalties ran to the operational structure rather than to any specific captain. "How many men does Bassi have inside the warehouse right now?" she said. 2, Farrow said. "His personal security. They rotate every 8 hours. The next rotation is at 6. "Which means you move before 6, she said to Nico. "Which means I move now," he said. He left the room and made 2 phone calls in the corridor with the study door pulled most of the way shut, and Claire stood in the study with Caruso and Farrow, and the 3 of them existed in the particular silence of people who have just realigned against a common problem and haven't yet determined what that means for any of them beyond the immediate. "You're not what he described," Farrow said to her. "He described me?" "To the staff before you arrived. He said he'd brought in someone to consult on an internal matter." Farrow looked at her with those eyes the color of nothing. "He didn't say sister of the mechanic. He said consultant." She looked at him. "What does that mean to you?" "It means he made a decision in that garage that wasn't purely operational." He said it without editorializing, the way a man states a technical fact. In 20 years, I've never seen Nico Valenti bring someone into this house for a reason that wasn't operational. He paused. I'm not telling you this for any purpose. I'm telling you because you're clearly the type of person who needs full information to function at capacity, and you're going to need to function at capacity in the next few hours. She looked at him for a long moment. You're a strange man to be in the position you're in. Yes, he said. I'm aware. Nico came back in. He looked at Claire. I'm going to the warehouse. I need you to stay here. You need me to watch Bassie, she said. He stopped. If Bassie wakes up and figures out what's happening, he needs to believe nothing is happening, she said. He can't see you gone. He can't see the property in a different configuration than it was at midnight. Someone needs to be walking around this house looking like it's a normal night, and it can't be your security because he knows their patterns. She held Nico's gaze. He doesn't know mine yet. He only met me once, and I was the newcomer, the civilian, the person he dismissed. I can move through this house right now, and if he sees me, he'll assume I can't sleep, which is plausible. And if he's already made contact through a secondary channel we don't know about, then it doesn't matter what I do, she said. But if he hasn't, then having me visible in this house for the next 3 hours while you're at the warehouse is worth more than having me somewhere safe. Nico looked at her for 3 seconds. 4. The look of a man performing a calculation that had variables he didn't fully trust. You don't carry, he said. I know how to not need to, she said. He reached into his jacket and took out something small and put it in her hand. A phone, a specific burner, with one number loaded in it. That's my direct line, Van, he said. Anything changes, anything moves, you call. You don't engage, you don't confront, you call. Understood. He held her eyes for one more second. Then he left. The next 3 hours were the longest of Claire Mercer's life. She moved through the house, she made herself visible. She went to the kitchen and made tea she didn't drink and left the light on. She walked the first-floor corridor twice at intervals that looked like insomnia rather than surveillance. She positioned herself at 4 a.m. in a chair in the main hall with a book she'd taken from the library, open to page 1, and she read the same paragraph 11 times. At 4:22, she heard a door. Not the subtle, controlled sound of someone being careful. A real door, the sound of someone moving with purpose. And the footsteps that followed were quick and heading toward the east stairs. She put the book down and stood. Bassie came around the corner and stopped. He was in his mid-50s, shorter than she'd expected from the way Nico and Pharaoh had spoken of him, with a round face and small, precise eyes behind rimless glasses. He was fully dressed at 4 a.m, in a suit jacket and dark slacks, with a phone in one hand and a bag in the other hand. Not a large bag, a carry-on, the bag of someone who planned to be gone before breakfast. He saw her. They looked at each other across 12 feet of corridor for 1 full second. Can't sleep either, Claire said. The eyes behind the glasses ran over her. The chair she'd come from, the book in her hand, the tea on the side table, the absence of anything that would indicate she was anything other than what she appeared to be, a civilian woman who couldn't sleep in an unfamiliar house. No, he said. The house makes sounds, she said. I keep thinking it's something. Yes. His eyes were moving, checking the corridor past her, the doors, the staircase. Is everything okay? She asked, letting just enough concern into her voice, not performed concern, but the natural concern of a person who has noticed another person behaving strangely. Fine, he said. Early call. At 4 a.m? Business, he said, and moved past her. She watched him go, toward the front of the house, the front entrance. She counted to 5. Then she looked at the burner phone in her hand and called the single loaded number. Nico picked up on the second ring. Bassie's moving, she said. Front entrance, fully dressed, carry bag. He's running. A silence of 2 seconds. How long ago? 30 seconds. I'm 12 minutes out. His voice was controlled and fast. I have men on the outer perimeter. They'll move to the front. Don't let him see you follow him. Already gone from the corridor. Claire. I know, she said. I'm not engaging. She moved to the window at the end of the corridor that gave a sight line to the front drive. Below, Bassi was already on the steps, moving fast, not running, but close to it, the walk of a man who has made a decision and is executing it. He had his phone at his ear. She watched him cross to a car she didn't recognize parked at the side of the drive, a dark sedan, not one of the organization's vehicles, which meant he'd arranged it in advance, which meant this had been planned for days or longer. Two of Nico's perimeter men emerged from the tree line to the left. Bassi saw them and stopped. The phone dropped from his ear. He stood in the drive in the pre-dawn dark with his carry bag in one hand and his phone in the other, and two large men between him and the car, and something happened in his face that Claire, watching from the second-floor window, couldn't fully read, but could feel. The collapse of a structure that had been built over months and years, a sudden and total architectural failure. He turned back toward the house. He looked up, and he looked directly at the window where Claire was standing. She didn't move, didn't step back. She looked back at him across the dark air of the drive and the 30 feet of dark between them, and she understood in that moment that he knew. That whatever calculation he'd been running about who she was and why she was here had just reconfigured completely and violently, and the expression on his round face behind the rimless glasses was no longer the expression of a man who had dismissed her. It was something colder and more specific than that, and it went through her chest like a wire pulled tight. Nico's car came through the gate at a speed that put gravel up against both sides of the driveway. It stopped short of Bassi, and Nico got out before it had fully settled. Claire watched from the window. She couldn't hear what was said. What she could see, Nico standing 4 feet from Bassi in the drive with the controlled stillness that was his particular form of fury, and Bassi not backing up, not collapsing, not performing the contrition of a man caught. Instead, standing his ground with a quality about him that she hadn't anticipated and that changed something in the air even from up here. He was smiling, small, precise, the smile of a man who had one more card and was deciding when to play it. Nico came inside with Bassi in front of him and two men behind, and Claire went downstairs because she couldn't stay at the window for what was coming next, and she needed to see it directly. They went to the study. Everyone was in the study. Pharaoh still in the chair, Caruso by the bookshelf, now without the scotch, and Bassi brought in and placed in the center of the room like an object to be examined. Claire stood by the door. Nico stood in front of Bassi and for a long moment didn't speak, and the room held that silence with the tension of something structural under load. The warehouse was empty, Nico said. Claire's breath stopped. I know, Bassi said. Where are the records? Bassi looked at Nico with those small, precise eyes, and the thing in them was not fear and not defiance. It was the particular quality of a man who has spent a long time being underestimated and has learned to find a use for it. They were moved 2 weeks ago, Bassi said, not to a second location. He paused. They were transmitted, digitally copied and transmitted to the federal unit 14 days ago. The physical copies were destroyed. He took a breath. The handoff is already done. The case is already built. What I was doing tonight was confirming the timeline for prosecution, not triggering it. That's already triggered. The room went so quiet Claire could hear the house. You handed them over 2 weeks ago, Nico said. The digital copies. Yes. Then tonight's call was to confirm the arrest timeline, Bassi said. Specifically, I wanted to confirm that the warrants were targeted at the three of us in this room. He glanced at Pharaoh, at Caruso, back to Nico. My immunity arrangement, as Pharaoh has probably told you by now, covers only me. What he doesn't know, what neither of them know, is that the arrangement has a condition. Another pause. The unit wants all three principals. Not just Nico. All three. My immunity is contingent on successful prosecution of all three targets. Pharaoh was looking at Bassi with an expression that had finally, for the first time all night, broken past its own control. You needed us arrested, Pharaoh said. His voice was very quiet. I needed you prosecuted, Bassi said. Arrested is just the first step. The murders, Nico said. The 3 civilians. You authorized them. Yes. And forged my signature. And yours, Bassi said, with a glance at Pharaoh. And Caruso's. He said it with the clean, unashamed precision of a man describing a business decision. The federal unit needed credible evidence against credible principals. Credible required signatures. I provided signatures. Why? Caruso's voice had a shaking in it. 20 years. Why? Bassi looked at him with something that was the faintest shadow of regret, or possibly just its surface. Because the organization is finished regardless. The landscape has changed. The networks are compromised. I've watched it deteriorating for 4 years, and I made a decision to be on the surviving side of it. He looked at Nico. I made the only rational decision. Nico was looking at him with an expression that Claire had never seen on his face before and hoped she never would again. Not fury, which would have been containable. Something beyond fury. Something that had gone past heat into a cold that was its own kind of burning. The warrants, Nico said. When? The call I made tonight was to push the timeline. Bassi's voice had acquired something. Not quite satisfaction, but the quality of a man who has held something compressed for a very long time and is finally releasing it. The warrants were going to drop next week. I asked for acceleration. Given that you're clearly aware of the situation, I imagine the unit will oblige. He looked at the room, at the 4 of them, arranged around him like points of a compass. My estimate is that you have 24 hours, possibly less. 24 hours. Claire ran the math without wanting to. 24 hours before federal warrants dropped on Nico Valenti and his 2 remaining captains, built on forged evidence that would not look forged because it had been built by someone who had spent 20 years learning exactly how to construct an airtight case from the inside of the organization being prosecuted. She looked at Nico. He was still looking at Bassi, and the quality of his stillness had changed. It was the stillness of a man at the precise edge of a decision, the kind of decision that once made doesn't unmake, and every person in the room could feel the weight of it. Don't, Claire said. The word came out of her before she'd decided to say it. Everyone looked at her. Don't, she said again. If you do what you're thinking of doing, you lose the only thing left, the only option you still have. Nico looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes. What option? He said. His voice was very quiet. Him, she said. Alive. Talking. She crossed the room until she was close enough to speak without the whole room hearing, close enough that she had to tilt her face up to hold his eyes. If he's already handed everything over, you can't get the records back. You can't undo the case. The only thing you can do is walk into a federal unit with him in front of you and offer something they want more than a prosecution they've already built. She held his gaze. Bassi knew something about federal investigations that he used to build his exit. You know something he doesn't. You know where this organization's money actually goes and who it actually connects to above you. That's worth more to a federal unit than the 3 of us in this room. Nico looked at her for a long time. That's not a clean option, he said. There are no clean options left, she said. There are only options. Behind them, Bassi made a sound. Not a word, something shorter and involuntary. The sound of a man who has run the numbers on what she'd just proposed and found them arriving somewhere he hadn't accounted for. She turned and looked at him, and she saw it on his face. The first real thing she'd seen there all night, beneath the small, precise eyes and the rimless glasses and the 14 months of careful construction. Bassi was afraid. Not of Nico, who he'd already accounted for. Not of prosecution, which he'd already arranged his way around. He was afraid of her. Because she had just described a play that cut directly through his immunity arrangement and came out the other side in a place where his immunity might not be worth the call that had secured it. She looked at Nico and said, "Make the call, tonight, before his lawyer opens his office in the morning." She didn't look away from him. It's the only move left. Nico stood there in the center of the study, in his estate at 5 in the morning, surrounded by the wreckage of 20 years and 3 betrayals at different depths, and he looked at a woman he had brought into his house 48 hours ago at the end of a loaded gun, and he made the decision that no version of himself he had constructed over 2 decades would have been capable of making. He reached for his phone. What none of them knew yet, not Claire, not Nico, not Bassi standing in the center of the room calculating damage, was that the federal agent Bassi had called was not in his office. He was already in a car, and he was 11 minutes from the estate's front gate. The phone was already in Nico's hand when the perimeter alarm went off. Not a siren. Nothing that loud. Nothing that announced itself to the whole property. A specific tone, low and pulsed, from the panel beside the study door, the kind of tone that had a specific meaning to the people who'd been trained to hear it. One of Nico's men was at the panel in 3 seconds and looked back with an expression that compressed something large into something very small. "Vehicle at the north gate," he said. "Black sedan, government plates, 1 driver. He's not stopping at the intercom." The room went completely still. Claire watched Nico's face do something she'd only seen it do once before, in the garage when she'd stepped in front of the gun. A hairline fracture of something behind the controlled surface, fast and involuntary, and then gone. He looked at Bassie. Bassie looked back at him with those small eyes and the glasses and the expression of a man watching a clock he'd set a long time ago finally run out. "You said the lawyer," Nico said. His voice had dropped to something barely above a breath. "You said the call went through a lawyer." "It does," Bassie said. "Usually." A pause that had a weight in it like a dropped stone. "Agent Rourke doesn't always wait for the lawyer." "He's already here," Claire said. "He's been here," Bassie said. "He's been in the area since yesterday evening. I didn't call tonight to trigger the arrest. I called to try to slow it down." Something moved through his face. The first genuine thing she'd seen from him, complicated and not clean. "I didn't expect things to accelerate this quickly inside the house." Nico grabbed him by the jacket lapel with one hand, fast and total, and Bassie's glasses moved on his face, and the carry bag hit the floor, and for 1 second the two men existed in a proximity that had gravity and heat, and 20 years in it. "If he comes through that gate," Nico said, very quiet, very direct, each word its own unit, "and I am not already on the phone with someone he wants more than me. This ends in one direction. You understand what I'm telling you?" "Yes," Bassie said. "Then give me the number." "Nico." Claire's voice was sharp. "There's no time for this. Get on the phone with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Not Rourke, not his unit, the main office. Call the duty line. If you walk in above Rourke's head with a proffer, Rourke's case becomes leverage, not a death sentence. But you have to do it in the next 4 minutes." Nico let go of Bassie's jacket. He looked at Claire for 2 seconds. The look of a man deciding whether to trust the only person in the room who had no stake in any of this except the one she'd walked in with from the beginning. "Dessa," he said to the man at the panel. "Get her out of the house. Side door, through the garden. Keep her on the property, but away from the main building." "I'm not leaving," Claire said. "You're a civilian, and there are about to be federal agents in my house, and I am not—" He stopped. "Reset. Please." The word landed in the room like something rare and slightly startling. She looked at him, then at the phone in his hand. "U.S. Attorney duty line. Tell them you have information on the Maranzano network, not this organization. Above this. They'll listen." His eyes went very still for 1 second. "How do you know about Maranzano?" "Pharaoh said Whitmore earlier tonight, and I looked at the geography of it, and I know what that district is used for, and I know what organization runs distribution through there, and it's not yours." She held his gaze. "You've been collecting debts for someone above you for years, haven't you? That's the actual leverage." Something moved through Nico's face that was the closest she'd seen to naked. "Go," he said. To her. Then, into the phone. "I need the duty officer. Tonight. Right now." Dessa took Claire's arm, and they went through the kitchen and out the side door into the dark, and the cold hit her like a hand against the face. October still, colder now than it had been, the grass under her feet wet with dew. They moved quickly through the garden along a path Dessa knew without having to look at it, heading toward a low stone structure at the property's edge that turned out to be a greenhouse. Inside it was warm and smelled of soil and growing things. Green and dense and utterly incongruous with the rest of the night. Dessa pulled the door shut behind them and stood with her hand on it and breathed. Claire looked at her phone. No signal in here. Stone walls, thick glass. She was cut off. She counted seconds. Couldn't help it. Estimated, Rourke reaching the house in 2 minutes, maybe less. Nico on the phone with the duty officer. The study with Bassie and Pharaoh and Caruso, and the specific gravity of what they were all trying not to do to each other while they waited for whatever came next. "Has he been in situations like this before?" she said to Dessa. "Yes," Dessa said. "What happened?" Dessa was quiet for a moment. Different each time, she said. But he's still here. Claire looked at the door of the greenhouse and the dark beyond it, and the lights of the main house visible through the glass at a distance. She could see the front of the property from here if she looked at the right angle. Could see the front drive, the steps, the iron lights on either side of the entrance. A vehicle came through the gate. One vehicle, moving at a pace that was not urgent but was not tentative either. The pace of someone with authority and nowhere to be except exactly where they were going. It stopped at the front steps. One man got out. Dark coat, no visible markings. He stood and looked at the house for a moment before going up the steps. Rourke. She couldn't see his face from here, only the shape of him, medium height, deliberate in his movements, the stillness of someone who did not waste motion. He went to the door and knocked once, and the door opened, and he went inside. And the night outside the greenhouse went back to its silence, and Claire stood in the warmth and the smell of soil and counted the seconds again. At 43 seconds, she went through the greenhouse door. "Miss Mercer," Dessa started. "Stay here," she said, and moved through the garden back toward the house. She came in through the side entrance, through the kitchen, moving low and fast and quiet, and heard the voices before she reached the hall. 3 distinct registers, controlled and overlapping in the specific rhythm of people trying to talk over each other without sounding like they're talking over each other. She stopped at the kitchen doorway, could see the hall, and through the hall, the open study door. Rourke was inside. He was standing in the center of the study in his dark coat with his hands in his pockets, and he was looking at Nico the way a man looks at something he's been building toward for a long time, with the calm of a settled bet. "Your call to the duty office is noted," Rourke said. His voice was measured and Midwestern and completely without effect. "And whatever you were going to offer, I've heard versions of it. Maranzano, his network, his upstream contacts. I've had 3 people offer me Maranzano in the last 2 years. He's insulated. You know he's insulated. So whatever you were building toward, it's not going to get you where you need to be." Nico was standing very still. "Then tell me what gets me where I need to be." "Nothing in this house," Rourke said. "That ship has been sailing for 14 months. He glanced at Bassi, who was standing to one side with the particular expression of a man watching a plan execute in a direction that has slightly escaped him. Then back to Nico. "I have what I need. The warrants drop at 9. My preference is everyone cooperative and no one gets hurt." "That's very considerate," Nico said. "It's practical," Rourke said. "Hurt people generate paperwork, and I already have a lot of paperwork." From the kitchen doorway, Claire watched Nico's hands, completely still at his sides. She could see the tendons in his forearms from here, and they were doing a thing that meant everything behind the stillness was under extraordinary pressure. "The Whitmore evidence," Nico said. "The murders. Documented and transmitted," Rourke said. "Your signatures authenticated by 2 independent forensic analysts. Forged. That's for a court to determine." Rourke said it without cruelty and without doubt. "My job ends at the evidence. Your job starts at your attorney." Nico looked at him for a moment. "You built this case on evidence from a man who killed 3 people to generate it. I built this case on evidence that was provided through a legally established cooperation arrangement," Rourke said. "What your associate did or didn't do prior to that arrangement is a separate matter. It's the same matter. Not procedurally." The study was quiet for 3 seconds. Caruso said, from somewhere to the right that Claire couldn't see, "What if the cooperation arrangement is compromised?" Rourke looked in Caruso's direction. "Meaning your cooperating witness isn't what he told you he was," Caruso said. His voice had the quality of a man who has nothing left to lose and has found a kind of freedom in that. "Bassi told you he had authorization from Valenti for the 3 killings. He told you he was acting on orders. That's why you needed Valenti's signature on the authorization, corroboration of Bassi's account." "That's a reasonable summary," Rourke said carefully. "Bassi authorized those killings himself," Caruso said, "without Valenti's knowledge. The signatures were created after the fact, which means your cooperating witness is not a witness to Valenti's criminal authorization of 3 murders. He's the principal in those murders who manufactured evidence to shift prosecution to someone else." A pause. "In exchange for immunity." Rourke was very still. "That's a significant claim," he said. I can document it, Caruso said. Bassi's communications, his direct authorization to the subcontractor, timestamps that predate any alleged conversation with Valenti by 11 days. He paused. I've had copies of those communications in a private account for 4 months. I've been trying to figure out what to do with them. The room had gone to a complete silence. Bassi turned and looked at Caruso with an expression that had finally, genuinely, lost all of its composure. You don't have that, Bassi said. His voice had changed completely. The controlled precision was gone, replaced with something raw and disarranged. Account number Hotel Foxtrot 77-9, Caruso said. Password is your mother's maiden name and the year you joined the organization. I watched you set it up, you idiot. I've been reading your mail for 4 months. Bassi took a step toward Caruso. One of Nico's men moved between them without being told. Rourke looked at Nico, then at Caruso, then at Bassi. The expression on his face was the expression of a man revising a calculation in real time, and he was doing it with the professional economy of someone who had done it before. But the revision was significant enough that even that economy couldn't quite conceal the scale of it. I'm going to need to make a call, Rourke said. I imagine you are, Nico said. Rourke stepped back and took out his phone and turned away from the room. And in the moment while his back was turned, the study held a collection of people who had all just survived something by a margin that was too close to look at directly, and the air in the room had the specific quality of air after something has passed through it that was not going to pass that way again. Claire came through the kitchen doorway and into the hall. Nico saw her. He looked at her across the hall with an expression she hadn't seen from him before. Unguarded in a way that was so unfamiliar on his face, it took her a full second to identify it. And what it was simply this: exhaustion. Real exhaustion. The kind that comes after the adrenaline stops. The kind that lives below the surface and comes up only when the immediate pressure releases enough to allow it. She walked toward him. They stood close enough to speak quietly without being heard by the room. Caruso had the documentation, she said. Apparently, he said. You didn't know. No. She looked at him. Are you all right? He looked back at her. The question sat between them in the hall, and he didn't answer it immediately, which she understood was its own kind of answer. The duty officer call, she said. Before Rourke interrupted it, what were you offering? Everything I have on Maranzano's upstream network, he said. Names, accounts, transfer records, 15 years of it. He paused. I've been maintaining those records since I understood what I was actually part of. She absorbed this. You've been building an exit. I've been building insurance, he said. I didn't know what kind until tonight. She looked at him steadily. That's the same thing. Maybe, he said. Rourke came back into the hall. He looked at Nico, then, briefly, at Claire. And the look was the look of a man who has done enough of this work to note a variable that wasn't in his original equation and file it without comment. The cooperation arrangement with Bassi is under review, Rourke said. Pending that review, I am not executing tonight's warrants. A pause. That is not immunity. That is not an offer. That is a window, and the window is narrow. I understand windows, Nico said. Your duty office call is logged. The AUSA will be in contact by 8 this morning. Rourke looked at him for one more moment. If the Caruso documentation verifies, your situation changes, not disappears. Changes. He looked at Bassi, who was standing in the study doorway with the expression of a man watching a building he'd constructed over years collapse in a direction he hadn't engineered. Him, on the other hand, Bassi looked at Rourke with something in his face that might have been the beginning of a protest, and then thought better of it. Nobody leaves this property tonight, Rourke said to the room. I'll have 2 agents at the gate by 6. That's not punitive. That's protective. If there are people connected to this situation who are not in this room, I'd rather everyone stays visible until the morning. He looked at Nico. Agreed. Agreed, Nico said. Rourke left. The house settled around his absence. Dessa appeared from somewhere. She'd come back in without anyone noticing, and went to the kitchen, and the sound of something being put on the stove filtered through the walls, the most ordinary sound in the world. Nico stood in the hall for a moment with his head slightly dropped and his hands at his sides, and he breathed. just breathed, once, slow and deliberate, like a man finding the floor after a long fall. Claire stood beside him. "Ethan," she said. "He's safe," Nico said. "I had confirmation from the Providence detail 2 hours ago." She nodded. Felt something in her chest release that had been locked for 2 days. Not completely, not cleanly, but enough to register. "What happens to Caruso and Farrow?" she said. "That depends on the morning. And you?" He looked at her. "That also depends on the morning." They stood in the hall outside the study where Bassie was being held by 2 men and Farrow was back in the chair with the exhaustion of a man who has watched his own plan unmake itself around him. And the house was quiet in the specific way it goes quiet when the catastrophic thing has passed and left its debris. And what remains is just the air and the damage and the work of figuring out what's still standing. "You should have stayed in the greenhouse," Nico said. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. "You heard most of it." "Enough. You came back in anyway." "I was going to come back in regardless," she said. "I just wanted to see what I was walking into first." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You do that. Assess before you commit. But you always commit." "Is that a criticism?" "No," he said, and something in his voice had a quality she hadn't heard from him before. Not soft, that wasn't the word, but something with less armor than usual. Something that was the residue of a very long night wearing down the places that normally held their shape. She looked at him for a moment, at the jaw that had healed slightly wrong, and the dark eyes that gave almost nothing away except when they gave everything, and the hands that were too large for normal use and were currently hanging at his sides with nothing in them for the first time in 2 days. "The promise," she said. "You mentioned one. In the car, the first night. You didn't say it, but it was in your face when you looked at me in the garage. What was it?" He was very still. "A girl," he said finally. "A long time ago. Someone who walked toward things the same way you do. Who didn't know how to step back from something she'd decided was worth stepping toward." He stopped. The words were being taken out and placed down carefully, the way you handle something that's been kept in a dark place for years, and you're not sure what condition it's in. "She died because of what I was, what I'd let myself become." He paused. "I made a promise at her grave that I would change. I didn't keep it. I told myself I'd change the structure, the operation, the way things were run, and instead I just got better at running the same thing." Claire looked at him steadily. "You kept looking at me in that garage," she said, "like you recognized something." "I did," he said. "And that's why you didn't pull the trigger." He met her eyes. "That's why I started listening. You still had to do the rest yourself." She held his gaze for a moment. Outside the house, the pre-dawn dark was beginning to thin at its edges, the first gray suggestion of morning working its way in from the east. In 4 hours, an AUSA would be on the phone. In a few hours more, whatever came next would begin its arrival. "Get some sleep," she said. "You first," he said. She looked at him. "You know neither of us is going to sleep." "I know," he said. "I said it anyway." She almost smiled, turned toward the stairs. "Claire," she stopped. "When this is over," he said, "when the morning happens and whatever comes next, I need you to know that the offer you came here on, the terms of it, those are closed. Your brother's safety isn't conditional on you staying. It's not conditional on anything." She turned back. "I know." "You knew before I said it." "Yes." "Then why are you still here?" She looked at him across the hall in the gray first light coming through the windows and thought about the answer to that. The real answer, not the practical one about Rourke and warrants and the value of being present when things were being decided. "Because it's not finished," she said. "And I don't leave things unfinished." She went up the stairs. At the second-floor landing, she heard it. Not from inside the house, from outside, from the direction of the east wing, a sharp sound, compressed and fast. The kind of sound that a person who has never heard a gunshot might not identify, but Claire had grown up in Crown Hill and she identified it in the half-second it took to reach her ears. One shot. Then, immediately after, shouting from below, Shad. Two voices, overlapping, both of Nico's men, and then Nico's voice cutting through both of them. A single word that she didn't catch, but that had the force of something structural failing. She was back down the stairs in 4 seconds. The east corridor was full. 3 of Nico's men and Nico himself. And at the end of the corridor, the door to the east sitting room was open, and there was light coming from it, and one of the men was on his phone, and another was crouched at the doorframe with his weapon out. Nico turned and saw her. "Get back," he said. What happened?" "Get back, Claire. What happened?" He looked at her for 1 second, and in that second she saw it in his face. Not the exhaustion from before, something different, something tighter and more urgent and with a different temperature. "Bassie's gone," he said. "He had a weapon we didn't find, and he went through the east window. He had 2 minutes unguarded." His jaw set. "He shot Caruso." The air in the corridor went flat and cold. "How bad?" she said. "Bad enough." "Where's Rourke?" "Still at the gate. His men aren't through yet." Nico looked at the man on the phone. "Get Rourke on the radio now. Tell him Bassie is on foot heading east, through the garden." He looked back at Claire, and his eyes had something in them. Not panic. Nico Valenti did not panic, but the specific quality of a situation that has left the last frame of what could be managed and entered the frame of what has to be survived. "The east garden leads to the old service road," she said. "If he reaches the road—" "I know," Nico said. "There's a gate at the east end of the service road. Is it locked?" "It should be." "Should be," she said. He looked at her, then at his men. Then he made the decision. She could see it arrive in him, the commitment after the assessment, the same sequence she recognized from the inside. And he moved toward the east door with 2 men behind him, and she was already moving alongside him before he could tell her not to. "Claire, I know the garden layout better than your men do," she said. "I've been mapping it for 2 days." He didn't answer. He pushed through the east door, and they went out into the morning, gray now, the dark genuinely thinning, the first bird starting somewhere in the trees, and the cold hit them both, and the grass was wet, and the garden stretched ahead, and somewhere in it, armed and running, was the man who had put this all in motion, and who was now the last loose end in a night that had been nothing but loose ends. And at the far edge of the garden, just visible in the gray early light, a figure moving fast toward the service road and the gate that should have been locked and might not be, and Nico beside her going from a walk to something faster, and the morning coming up around them cold and gray and unfinished, and everything still in the balance. The service road gate was not locked. Claire saw it from 40 yards back, the chain hanging loose, the padlock open on its hasp, and beyond it the pale gravel of the road catching the first gray light of morning. Bassie had planned this. Not tonight, not improvised. Planned it days ago, maybe the moment he'd made the call to Rourke, the contingency inside the contingency. The man who had spent 14 months building exits now using the last one. Nico saw it too, and his pace changed. Not faster, the opposite. The way a person decelerates when they've done the math and don't like the result. His hand came up, and his 2 men stopped behind them. Bassie was through the gate and on the road. A car was there. Dark, idling, positioned nose out. Someone had driven it in from the other end of the service road, which meant someone outside the property had been waiting. Which meant there was a piece of this that none of them had found yet, a thread they hadn't known to pull. "Go back inside," Nico said to Claire. "He's going to get in that car," she said. "I know." "And if he gets in that car?" "I know," he said again, and his voice had a quality she recognized now, the sound of a man who has reached the bottom of his options and is holding what's left. He looked at his 2 men. One of them had a weapon out. The angle was bad. Bassie was 30 yards past the gate with the car between him and them, and the light was wrong, and there was a civilian in the road behind that car that none of them had seen until now, a figure standing at the driver's side door with their hands visible. Not a threat, a pickup. Someone who had been paid to be in a specific place at a specific time and didn't know what they'd been paid into. Nico put his hand on his man's arm. "Hold." He walked through the gate alone. Claire went through it behind him. He didn't stop her this time. Bassi had reached the car and had his hand on the door handle and was looking back at them. At Nico coming toward him across the gravel in the gray morning. No weapon drawn, hands at his sides, moving with the particular deliberateness of a man who has decided that the next 30 seconds are going to go one specific way and is simply traveling toward them. "Don't," Bassi said. His voice had lost all its architecture. The precision was gone, the control, the careful construction of everything he'd presented in the study. What was underneath it was just a man at the end of something he'd built that had collapsed on him. "Nico, there's nothing left here. It's over." "Come back inside," Nico said. You're going to hand me to Rourke." "Yes." "Then I'm not coming back inside." "Bassi." Nico stopped 10 feet from him. The gravel was wet and the morning was coming up cold around them, and the idling car put a low vibration into everything. "The immunity arrangement is finished. Whatever you built with Rourke, Caruso's documentation ends it. You go back in there, you're a cooperating witness with a compromised arrangement, which is a worse position than where you started, but it's a position. You go through that door." He didn't finish the sentence because he didn't need to. Bassi looked at him with the rimless glasses and the round face and something in his eyes that was old and tired and had been building for a very long time. 20 years, he said. "I know." 20 years and you never asked, Bassi said, what any of us wanted, what any of us were trying to get to. You just kept building, kept expanding, kept making decisions, and we executed them, and that was the arrangement, and it was never going to be anything else. Nico was very still. "Is that why?" he said. Quiet. "That's part of why," Bassi said. "The other part is that I'm 61 years old and I'm tired, and I looked at where I was going to end up, and I decided I'd rather end up somewhere else." He paused. "I made the wrong choices getting there. I know that. You killed 3 people. I authorized it. There isn't," Nico said, flat and final. "There isn't a difference. Not for them." Bassi's hand was still on the car door handle. His knuckles had gone pale. "Caruso," he said. "Is he—" "I don't know yet." Something moved through Bassi's face. Not enough and too late, but it moved. He looked at the car door under his hand and then at Nico, and then past Nico at Claire, who was standing 10 feet behind and to the side, and he looked at her for a moment with those precise eyes that had lost their precision, and what was in them when he looked at her was something she hadn't seen from him at all, something that might have been in a different life with different choices, the capacity for shame. "Tell Caruso," he started. "Tell him yourself," Nico said. "Come back inside." A long moment. The car idled. The morning birds were getting louder, more of them, different voices layering in, the world assembling itself around this small tableau on a gravel road, as if the world didn't know or care what was happening on it. Bassi took his hand off the door. He turned to the driver, a young man, maybe 25, visibly terrified, who had clearly been told nothing useful about what he'd driven into. "Go," Bassi said. "Just go. Take the other end of the road and go." The young man did not need to be told twice. The car pulled away and its taillights disappeared around the curve of the service road, and the sound of it faded. And what was left was the gravel and the 3 of them and the morning coming in and the gate hanging open behind them. Bassi looked at Nico. "I'm not going to say I'm sorry," he said, "because it wouldn't mean anything and you'd both know it." "I know," Nico said, "but Caruso." He stopped. The word sat there with its weight. "If he makes it, then you'll have the chance to say it to him," Nico said, "and he can decide what to do with it." Rourke's 2 agents came through the gate at a jog, and they stopped when they saw the 3 people standing in the road in the early morning gray, and the absence of crisis in the physical arrangement of them, and they held their position and looked at Rourke, who had come through behind them. Rourke looked at Bassi, then at Nico, then briefly at Claire. "This man needs to be in federal custody," Rourke said. "He's aware," Nico said. Bassi walked toward Rourke with the deliberate step of a man going somewhere he'd been avoiding for a long time and has finally stopped avoiding. He didn't run. He didn't try anything. He walked across the gravel in the wet morning air and put his hands behind his back without being asked, and Rourke's agent cuffed him with the professional efficiency of someone doing a task, And then Bassi stood there in handcuffs in the gray morning and looked once more at Nico. "The Maranzano records," he said, "in your duty office call. You were offering everything." "Yes," Nico said. "That's enough to burn the whole network," Bassi said. "Not just Maranzano, everyone above him." "I know." Bassi nodded slowly. Something settled in his face. Not peace, but the particular relief of a man who has been carrying a structure for too long and has put it down, regardless of what it costs to put it down. "Then maybe something good comes out of this after all," he said. "Even if none of us get to see it the way we planned." Rourke led him back through the gate. Nico stood on the gravel road and watched until they were through, and the gate swung mostly closed behind them. And then he stood there in the silence for a long moment, with his back to Claire and his hands at his sides and the morning accumulating around him, and she watched the set of his shoulders do something. Not collapse, Nico Valenti did not collapse, but a degree of release, a pressure that had been held for years working its way out through the specific geometry of how he was standing. She walked up beside him. They stood there together on the road for a moment, not saying anything, looking at the gate. "Caruso," she said. "My man called it in the moment it happened," he said. "Ambulance should have reached the house by now." "What was the shot?" "Side, high." His jaw moved. "Could be survivable. Bassi wasn't a marksman." She nodded. "Let it sit." "You should have stayed in the greenhouse," he said, for the second time. "You said that already. You keep not listening." "I listened," she said. "I just decided differently." He looked at her sideways in the morning light, the gray of it, the tentative first color coming in at the horizon, pale gold beginning to define the edge of the tree line. He looked at her the way he'd been looking at her since the garage, with that quality of attention she'd stopped finding unsettling and started finding simply true. The attention of a man for whom looking at things carefully was not a habit but a survival mechanism that had turned into something else somewhere along the way. "Come inside," he said. They went back through the gate and across the garden and through the side door, and the house received them back into its warmth and its smell of old wood and the coffee Dessa had been making since she'd come back from the greenhouse, and the ordinary persistence of a house going about its business, regardless of what had happened in and around it through the night. Caruso was alive. The ambulance had arrived at 6:14, and the paramedics had assessed the wound as serious, but not critical. The shot had gone through the left side, missing the lung by what one of the paramedics described, with the professional economy of someone who'd seen worse and better, as enough margin to matter. He was stable. He was conscious. He was going to a hospital under guard, which was its own kind of statement about where things stood. Claire heard this from Dessa, in the kitchen. Over coffee she actually drank this time. Nico was with Rourke in the study for an hour. She didn't try to hear it. She sat in the kitchen and drank the coffee and felt the night drain out of her in slow increments, the adrenaline that had been running her for 12 hours, finding its bottom and leaving behind the exhaustion it had been masking. When Nico came back to the kitchen, he sat down across from her. He looked tired, genuinely tired, the way she'd seen him look for 1 second in the hall and then reassemble over. But now the assembly wasn't happening, and what was there instead was just a man at a kitchen table at 6:30 in the morning with coffee in front of him and a night's worth of consequence settling around him like sediment. "Rourke's taking the Maranzano proffer to the AUSA," he said. "The duty office call is being upgraded. They want a formal debrief by noon." "What does that mean for you?" "It means the warrants on me are suspended pending cooperation review." He paused. "It's not immunity. It's not a deal. It's a conversation, and the conversation will take months and the outcome isn't determined." He looked at his coffee. "But it's a door." "A door is enough," she said. He looked up at her. "Is it?" She met his eyes. "It's more than you had 12 hours ago." He was quiet for a moment. "Pharaoh is going to make his own arrangement. He has enough to offer independently. He was the financial architect for most of the last decade. He knows where everything is and what it connects to. Rourke will deal." "And the organization?" Nico looked at the table, at his hands on it, those 2 large hands still. "There is no organization," he said. There hasn't been, not the way it was, for a long time. I've known that. I've been managing a decline and calling it something else. He stopped. The Maranzano network is the only structure still standing above all of this. And when that goes, and it will go because what I'm giving Rourke is complete enough to bring the whole thing, there's nothing to come back to. So it ends, she said. So it ends, he said. She looked at him across the kitchen table in the growing morning light. The sun was coming up properly now, real light, the pale gold from the horizon reaching the kitchen windows and laying itself across the table between them. And in it, Nico Valenti looked like what he was. A man at the end of a very long road, not young, not unbroken, not unaccountable for any of it, but present and real, and looking at her with those dark eyes that had been looking at her with the same quality of attention since the moment she'd walked into a garage and stood between him and her brother. I want to ask you something, he said. Ask? The girl, he said. The one I told you about. Last night. He stopped. Set the words down carefully. You reminded me of her in the garage, the way you stood. I said that's why I listened. That's true. But it's not the whole truth. She waited. The whole truth is that I was reminded of her, and then I looked at you and you weren't her. And it wasn't the resemblance that made me stop. He held her eyes. It was you. The specific thing you were doing, which was choosing your brother over your safety without calculation or performance. I haven't seen that in a long time. I haven't seen someone do the right thing purely because it was the right thing to do, without an angle, without a backup plan. He paused. I'd forgotten what it looked like. Claire looked at him steadily. You kept the records, she said. The Maranzano documentation. 15 years of it. That's not someone who forgot. Keeping records is not the same as acting on them. No, she said, but it's not nothing either. She folded her hands around her coffee cup. You kept them because some part of you always knew there was going to be a moment when you needed to do the right thing. You just didn't know what the trigger was going to be. He looked at her for a long moment. You're very generous for someone I almost had killed. I'm accurate, she said. Generous would be different. Something moved through his face then. Not a smile exactly. The muscles weren't quite doing that, but the precursor to one, the internal shift that comes before the expression. And she saw it and noted it and recognized it as something she hadn't seen from him before. Something that lived under all of it, underneath the controlled stillness and the flat voice and the 23 years of necessary decisions. He was going to be all right. She didn't know how, and she didn't know what shape it was going to take. And the road from here was long and had federal prosecutors on it, and months of deposition and a public reckoning she couldn't calculate the dimensions of. But he was going to be all right. She could see it in him the way she could see structural integrity in a building. Not in the surface, in the bones. She pushed her chair back and stood. I need to call Ethan, she said. Use the landline in the library, he said. It's clean. She nodded, went to the door of the kitchen, stopped. The condition I named, she said, before I agreed to come here. No innocent family becomes collateral again. You said you understood. I remember. I need it in writing, she said. Not to you, to Rourke, as part of whatever arrangement you're building. A formal condition in the cooperation agreement that the people who were targeted as leverage in this case, meaning Ethan and me, are named as protected parties. And the federal record reflects that we were involuntary, non-participating civilians. Nico looked at her. That's a specific ask. I know what I'm asking. I'll have it in the agreement by noon, he said. She looked at him one more time, then she went to the library and called her brother. Ethan picked up on the first ring. Claire. His voice was the voice of someone who had not slept and had been waiting for a phone to ring for 2 days. Claire, are you... I'm fine, she said. I'm fine, Ethan. A silence on the line. In it, she heard him breathe, the specific quality of his breath, her brother's breath, the sound of someone who had been holding something and was now letting it go. What happened? He said. Tell me everything. Later, she said, when I see you, which is going to be soon. She paused. The shop is okay. I'll handle the civic invoice, and I need you to stop worrying about me. That's not a thing I can stop. I know, she said, but stop anyway. He was quiet. Then, "Are you coming home?" She looked out the library window at the morning. The property in full daylight now, ordinary and large and quiet, the mist burned off, the two men walking the perimeter in the clear air, the trees at the edge starting to show their October colors, red and gold, and the stubborn green of things not ready to let go yet. "Soon," she said. She meant it, and she meant the other thing too, the thing underneath it. That home was something she understood the definition of, and the definition hadn't changed, and wherever she was standing right now, it was not that. It was something else, something she didn't have a word for yet, and she was going to need more time to find the word, and she was aware of that, and not afraid of it. She hung up the phone and stood in the library in the morning light. The months that followed didn't have the shape of resolution so much as the shape of work. That was the honest version of it. The cooperation agreement was formalized over 6 weeks of meetings with the U.S. Attorney's Office, with 2 federal public defenders present, with Rourke attending every session and taking notes with the same measured calm he'd brought to the gravel road in the pre-dawn dark. The Maranzano Network, the structure above Nico's organization, the one that had been running distribution and money management through 12 intermediary operations for a decade and a half, came apart over the following 4 months in a series of arrests that started at the edges and worked inward, each one pulling the next, the whole architecture collapsing with a speed that surprised even the people who'd built the case. Nico Valenti was not arrested. He was not given immunity either. What he was given was a formal cooperation designation, which meant that the charges pending against him existed in a specific legal suspension, contingent on the completion of his cooperation and the evaluation of his proffer, and which would be reviewed at 18 months. It was not a clean outcome. His lawyers told him so repeatedly. He told them he understood, and he did not spend time looking for the clean version of it because he'd stopped believing clean versions existed some years ago. The forged authorization records, the ones bearing his signature on the 3 unauthorized killings, were evaluated by 4 forensic document analysts and declared fraudulent, with a combined confidence level that the AUSA described in the formal filing as definitive. Bassey's cooperation arrangement was formally dissolved. He was charged with 3 counts of murder in the first degree, conspiracy to obstruct federal investigation, and evidence fabrication. He pled guilty on all counts 14 weeks after the morning on the service road, in a proceeding that lasted 40 minutes and generated almost no press because by then there was a much larger story consuming the oxygen. Farrow made his own deal, as Nico had said he would. He spent 11 months in federal debriefing and emerged into a monitored release arrangement that put him in a small city in the Southwest under a modified name. He called Nico once through a lawyer in the 7th month. He didn't say much. Nico said even less. The call lasted 4 minutes, and both of them seemed to understand that it constituted a kind of closing that was more complete than most people got. Caruso survived the gunshot. He spent 3 weeks in the hospital and then 6 more weeks in a facility outside the city. And when he came out, he was thinner and walked slightly differently and had made a decision that he apparently didn't discuss with anyone because he simply executed it. He moved back to the neighborhood where he'd grown up, in a part of the city that had nothing to do with anything he'd spent 20 years building, and he found a job managing inventory for a restaurant supply company, and he went to work at 7 in the morning and came home at 5. And as far as anyone could tell, that was the whole of it. He and Nico did not speak. That was not bitterness. It was an acknowledgement by both of them that some things, when they're finished, are finished, and the most honest response to that is to let them be. Ethan Mercer came back from Providence after 3 weeks, not 30 days, because the 30 days had been predicated on a threat that no longer existed, and there was no reason to make him wait. He came back and opened the shop and fixed the Civic and paid off 6 months of the equipment lease with money that arrived in his business account from a source that was described in the transfer records as a settlement from an insurance dispute he'd never filed. And he understood what it was, and he chose not to return it because he had too much work to do to spend time on principle when the principle had already been addressed by someone who had more standing to address it than he did. He never spoke to Nico Valenti directly. He sent one message, through Claire, which he asked her to pass on verbatim. Tell him the Civic runs clean now, and that's enough. She passed it on. Nico received it in the dining room of the estate, which was now functionally his residence and nothing more, the operational infrastructure of what it had been dismantled over 3 months, with the assistance of federal monitors and Nico's own explicit cooperation. And he looked at the message on Claire's phone and handed it back without a word. And she saw something happen in his face that was brief and genuine and done before it fully formed. She didn't ask him about it. She understood by then which moments required language and which ones didn't. She came back to the estate for the first time 3 weeks after she'd left it. She came to pick up the bag she'd packed in 4 minutes and never fully unpacked during her time there, and to sign a document that the federal coordination team needed her signature on, something about her status as a protected civilian party, which was exactly the document she'd asked Nico to have in the cooperation agreement, formalized now into the official record. She expected to sign it, take the bag, and go. She was there for 4 hours. Not because anything held her, not because anyone asked her to stay. She walked through the house, and it was a different house, quieter, stripped of the staff and the operational energy and the particular tension of a place that had been both a residence and a command center. Dessa was still there. She was always going to be there. That was evident. Dessa moved through the house with the same unhurried competence and had made coffee by the time Claire reached the kitchen, and they sat at the kitchen table together for 30 minutes and talked about things that had nothing to do with any of it. About Dessa's sister in Raleigh, about the garden, about the type of winter the tree line suggested. Nico found her in the library. It had become their room, she supposed, in the sense that it was where they'd had the first real conversation and several of the important subsequent ones. She was at the window again, which was her default, because she processed things better when she had a sightline to the outside. He stood in the doorway. "You're signing and leaving," he said. "I signed," she said. "I'm about to leave." He came into the room and stood across it from her, and they looked at each other in the afternoon light. Winter light now, the thin, clear light of November, which laid itself across the floor between them in a long, pale rectangle and gave everything in the room a quality of definition. "The estate goes on the market in January," he said. "I'm going to rent something smaller in the city, closer to the federal office, for the duration of the cooperation period." "That sounds practical," she said. "It's going to be a strange couple of years," he said. "Yes." "I don't know what I am when it's over," he said. It was a plain statement, not self-pity, not performance of uncertainty, just a man saying something true. "I've been a specific thing for 23 years. When that's dismantled, I don't know what's underneath." She looked at him. "Something's underneath," she said. "You kept the records. You listened in the garage. You called the duty office before Rourke got through the door." She paused. "Something's been underneath the whole time. You just haven't had the space to find out what it looks like when it's not carrying everything else." He was quiet. "That's the part I can't tell you," she said. "What it looks like. You have to go find out." "I know," he said. "But you'll find out," she said. "That I can tell you." He looked at her with those dark eyes that had been the first thing she'd properly seen in the garage. Before the gun, before the men, before the whole weight of what the night was. The first thing she'd really seen had been his eyes. And what was in them now was something she could name after weeks of learning the vocabulary of his face. It was the same thing that had been in them in the garage, the thing that had been her first signal that this man was not entirely what he was operating as, the thing she'd looked for and found and decided to address directly. It was the capacity for something better than what he'd been doing. She picked up her bag. "I'll be in touch about Ethan's paperwork," she said. "The federal protection notation needs to be renewed at the 6-month mark. Your attorney should flag it." "Already flagged," he said. "Good." She moved toward the door. "Claire." She stopped. Turned. He was still standing in the middle of the library in the November light with his hands at his sides and his jaw set and his eyes on her. And he was not a man who said things easily or performed emotion for the benefit of the room, and so what he said next arrived with the full weight of having been held for a long time before it was released. "The shop," he said. "Ethan's shop. The insurance transfer." "I know what it was," she said. "I know you know." He paused. "I need you to know it wasn't a transaction. It wasn't settlement. It was—" He stopped. Tried again, without the language that came easily to people who'd had practice with it. "It was what I owed, for what I almost did, and for what I didn't do because of you." He met her eyes. I don't know how to say that in a way that isn't. You just said it, she said. He looked at her. She looked back at him, and for a moment the library held them both in its winter light, and it was enough. Not everything, not a conclusion, but enough, which was its own kind of completeness. Go find out what's underneath, she said, and she left. Outside, the November air was cold and clean, and carried in it the smell of dead leaves and distant wood smoke, and the specific particular quality of a day that had decided to be honest about what season it was. She walked to her car, her own car, her ordinary city car, the one she'd been driving for 6 years with the dent in the rear quarter panel that she'd been meaning to have Ethan look at for 2 of them. She put her bag in the back and got in and sat for a moment with the engine off. She thought about the garage, the oil smell, the radio with its trumpet. The way she'd come through the back door and crossed the floor and put herself between her brother and the gun without pausing to think about whether it was the right decision, because it was the only decision, the only possible decision. The decision she'd been built to make by every year of her life that had preceded it. She thought about what had come after. The estate, the library, the kitchen table, the greenhouse in the dark, Pharaoh's flat patient eyes and Bassie's precise ones, and Caruso's exhausted face in the study and the gravel road in the pre-dawn gray. Rourke. The shot. The morning coming up around all of them. She thought about Nico in the library just now, standing in the November light, saying, I don't know what's underneath, with the particular honesty of a man who has stopped pretending to know things he doesn't. She started the car. 6 months later, on a Tuesday morning in April, a man walked into Mercer's garage in Crown Hill. Ethan was under a Ford F-150 when the bell above the bay door chimed, and he slid out on the rolling board and looked up and went still for a moment. Nico Valenti was standing in the entrance in a dark jacket. No entourage, no vehicles behind him, alone, the way a person is when they've shed the architecture of something and are finding out what their actual dimensions are. He looked different in the morning light of a regular Tuesday. Not smaller, that was the wrong word. Just more accurately himself. He looked at Ethan. Ethan looked back at him. The Civic, Nico said. Claire said it runs clean. She's right, Ethan said. A pause. I'm looking for a mechanic, Nico said. I have a '68 Mustang that's been sitting under a cover in a storage unit for 11 years. The previous owner said the engine was salvageable. I've been meaning to find out. He looked at the garage around him, at the tools laid out in their specific order, at the parts on the bench, at the lift and the work lamp and the mini fridge with its sticker. If you have the capacity. Ethan was quiet for a moment. I have the capacity, he said. I can leave it this afternoon, Nico said. If that works. That works, Ethan said. Nico nodded once. Then he turned to go. Mr. Valenti, Ethan said. Nico stopped, turned back. Ethan looked at him, his sister's jaw, his father's eyes, the face of a young man who had been inside the most frightening night of his life and had come out the other side of it still standing, still working, still showing up to the shop at 7 in the morning and leaving the light on. She's doing all right, he said, in case you were wondering. Nico held his gaze for a moment. I know, he said. I was wondering anyway. He left. Ethan slid back under the F-150 and lay on his back on the concrete floor and looked up at the undercarriage and listened to the neighborhood outside. The buses, the voices, the particular ambient life of Crown Hill going about the business of its morning. And he thought about his sister, who had run across this neighborhood in the dark to stand in front of a loaded gun and had come back changed in ways she hadn't yet finished mapping, and who was doing all right, which was the truest and most complete thing that could be said about any of them. He picked up his wrench. The bay door was open. The morning came in with the smell of April in it, cold still, but with something underneath the cold that was preparing, the way things prepare before they commit. He got back to work.